Are you hurt? Talk to me!
Have you ever wondered if one split-second decision could change your entire life? What if saving a stranger's life meant falling into a love so powerful it could break every rule society ever made? Today's story will take you on an emotional roller coaster that proves love knows no boundaries, not wealth, not status, not even the darkest moments of despair. Before we begin, if you love intense romance and dramatic plot twists, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. And if this story moves you, don't forget to smash that like button and drop a comment telling me what you think will happen next. Now, let's dive into a tale of sacrifice, forbidden love, and the kind of courage that only comes from the heart. This is a story you won't forget. Keisha's worn sneakers scraped against the cracked pavement as she made her way home through the empty pre-dawn streets. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest after another grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital cafeteria. Her fingers absently rubbed at the small of her back, where the pain had settled in, a constant reminder of hours spent on her feet serving meals and wiping down tables under those unforgiving industrial lights. She suppressed a yawn and checked the few bills tucked into her jacket pocket. Just enough for tomorrow's Metro card and maybe some eggs if they were on sale. The October air bit at her exposed skin, and she pulled her faded denim jacket closer, wishing she had saved enough for that winter coat she'd been eyeing at the thrift store. All she wanted was to get back to her cramped room in the boarding house, kick off these shoes that were 2 sizes too small, and sleep until her alarm dragged her back to reality. But fate had different plans. As she rounded the bend near the overpass, her heart seized in her chest. A man stood perfectly still in the middle of the road, his body rigid, his face turned upward as though waiting for judgment from the heavens themselves. The screaming engine of an approaching delivery truck shattered the early morning silence, its headlights cutting through the darkness and illuminating him like a spotlight on a stage. Keisha's mind registered what was happening before her body could react. This wasn't an accident waiting to happen. This was intentional. Without a second thought, she dropped her canvas bag and sprinted forward. Her legs pumped harder than they had in years as she launched herself at the stranger, her shoulder connecting with his ribs just as the truck's horn split the air. They crashed together onto the unforgiving concrete, rolling across the rough surface in a tangle of limbs. Keisha felt her shoulder scrape raw against the road, tasted copper in her mouth where she'd bitten her tongue. The truck roared past, missing them by inches, the driver's angry shouts fading into the distance. Breathing hard, Keisha pushed herself up on trembling arms. Blood dripped from a gash on her forearm, and her palms burned like fire. But none of that mattered. She crawled toward the man beside her, panic rising in her throat. He lay motionless, his jet-black hair falling across his forehead, a thin trail of blood running from where his head had struck the pavement. His skin was pale in the streetlight, his features sharp and aristocratic even in unconsciousness. "Please be okay," she breathed, her voice shaking as she reached out to check his pulse. His eyelids fluttered, and then those eyes opened, dark and bottomless, filled with something that made her entire world tilt on its axis. Not gratitude. Not relief. Something far more terrifying. "Why would you do that?" His voice came out hoarse, broken, each word laced with anguish that seemed to reach into her chest and squeeze. "Why did you interfere?" The meaning behind his words crashed over her like ice water. Keisha froze, her mind refusing to accept what he was telling her. He had wanted that truck to hit him. He had been standing there waiting for death, and she had stolen it from him. Her hands shook violently as she fumbled for her phone, her fingers slippery with blood as she dialed for help. "I need an ambulance," she managed to say, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "There's been an accident near the Riverside overpass. Please hurry." But even as the dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker, Keisha couldn't tear her gaze away from his face, couldn't stop wondering what kind of demons could drive a person to such darkness. The emergency room was a blur of harsh lights and antiseptic smells. Keisha sat in the rigid plastic chair next to his bed, her own wounds cleaned and bandaged, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. The monitors beeped steadily, confirming what the doctors had told her. Physically, he would be fine. No broken bones, no internal bleeding, just surface wounds that would heal in time. But Keisha knew better. The real damage was buried deep, where no X-ray could see it. She had stayed through the endless night, unable to explain to herself why leaving felt impossible. When the hospital administrator brought her the bill, she quietly used her credit card at the payment window, wincing at the balance she knew she couldn't afford, but also knowing she couldn't walk away. As pink dawn light began to filter through the blinds, she felt the faintest pressure on her hand. Looking down, she saw his fingers had curled weakly around hers, even though sleep still held him. The touch sent unexpected warmth spreading through her chest, and she settled deeper into the uncomfortable chair, unwilling to let go of this fragile connection they'd somehow forged. When consciousness finally reclaimed him, the first words out of his mouth were unexpected. "Where is she?" His voice was rough with sleep and desperation as his eyes swept the sterile room frantically. Instead of finding the face he sought, his gaze landed on an imposing woman in her 50s. Her silver hair was styled in an immaculate bob, her charcoal suit tailored to perfection, every inch of her radiating authority and old money. She regarded him with eyes that held both relief and thinly veiled disapproval. "Jae-sung," she said, his name clipped and precise in her mouth. "Do you have any comprehension of the chaos you've caused this past week? Vanishing without explanation, ignoring every call, and now this incident." Jae-sung's heart plummeted. The chair beside his bed sat empty. The woman who had thrown herself into danger to save him, who had kept vigil through the dark hours, was nowhere to be seen. "There was someone," he said urgently, struggling to sit up despite the way his head spun. "A woman. She was here. I felt her." "The medical staff mentioned someone paid your expenses." His mother cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Some stranger looking for attention or compensation, no doubt. I've already had security pull the recordings. You needn't concern yourself with such individuals." But Jae-sung's jaw set with determination. He could still feel the warmth of her hand clasped in his, could still see the genuine fear and care in her dark brown eyes. Whoever she was, she hadn't saved him seeking reward or recognition. She had risked everything for a complete stranger, and now she had vanished like smoke. "Your fiancé is waiting at the estate," his mother continued, adjusting her Hermes bag with practiced efficiency. "Minji has been beside herself with worry. The merger preparations are already delayed because of your breakdown." That word struck him like a physical blow. Breakdown. As if the suffocating weight of expectations that had driven him to that overpass was nothing more than a temporary lapse in judgment, easily dismissed and quickly forgotten. Jae-sung closed his eyes, remembering exactly why he had been standing in that road. The arranged marriage to Lee Minji, daughter of his mother's business associate, the corporate alliance that would cement their family's empires, the life that had been mapped out for him since childhood with no consideration for his own desires, his own dreams, his own soul. But now there was something else. Someone else. A woman whose name he didn't know, whose face he could barely remember through the fog of pain, but whose courage had given him something he thought he'd lost forever. A reason to keep breathing. As the nurses processed his discharge, Jae-sung made a silent promise. He would find her, and somehow, he would make everything right. Keisha stood in the shadows of the hospital parking garage, her eyes tracking the wheelchair being pushed toward the entrance. Her chest ached with a loss she couldn't name or explain. She had called in sick to work, forfeiting wages she desperately needed, just to make sure he was okay. But the moment she'd seen that elegant woman in the designer suit, heard the commanding tone she used with the hospital staff, Keisha had understood with painful clarity. This man existed in a universe light years removed from her own. A universe of wealth and power where people like her were invisible, less than invisible. She had slipped away before anyone could spot her, settling the bill anonymously and retreating into the background where she belonged. Now, watching him being assisted into a gleaming black luxury sedan that cost more than she'd earn in a decade, the chasm between their worlds felt insurmountable. The woman, Clearly his mother had looked straight through her earlier when they'd crossed paths in the corridor. The contemptuous glance, the slight curl of her lips, had communicated everything Keisha needed to understand about her place in this scenario. As the sedan glided away, Keisha felt moisture prick her eyes. She had saved his life, but perhaps that was all she was meant to do. Their paths had intersected for one desperate moment, and now they would diverge forever. She turned away, straightening her shoulders, and began the long trek back to her neighborhood. Tomorrow she would return to the cafeteria, to her tiny room, to her quiet existence. And maybe eventually, she would stop wondering about the stranger with the haunted eyes who had asked her why she interfered. But Jae-sung had very different intentions. The penthouse stretched before him like a beautiful prison, all gleaming marble and floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the sparkling city below. Jae-sung stood at the window, his reflection ghostly against the night, his thoughts consumed by gentle hands and worried eyes. Keisha Williams, he whispered to the darkness, the name he'd glimpsed on the hospital visitor registry. It was the only clue he had, but it was enough. He would find her. Darling, you look absolutely dreadful. Minji's voice drifted across the vast room like honey laced with arsenic. She approached with rehearsed grace, her Jimmy Choos clicking against the marble, her salon-perfect hair catching light from the chandelier overhead. Jae-sung didn't turn. He could see her reflection in the glass, beautiful and frigid, exactly as she'd always been. Mother mentioned your accident, Minji continued, her tone calibrated to express precisely the right amount of concern. How unfortunate that some random woman inserted herself. I do hope she's not expecting some sort of reward. Something hot and dangerous ignited in Jae-sung's chest. Reward? Well, naturally. Minji's laugh was like crystal shattering. People like that always have ulterior motives. Poor thing probably thinks she's won the lottery, rescuing the heir to Kong Enterprises. I'm certain she's already calculating how to exploit this for maximum gain. Jae-sung's hands balled into fists. The woman who had stayed by his side through the night, who had quietly paid his hospital bills with money she clearly didn't have, who had disappeared without even revealing her name. That woman was nothing like Minji's description. Leave. His voice was soft. Lethal. Minji blinked, her perfect composure faltering. Excuse me? Jae-sung turned to face her, his dark eyes blazing with intensity that made her retreat a step. I said leave. Now. Jae-sung, what's come over you? Minji's voice rose, uncertainty creeping through her polished exterior. Is this about that woman? Don't tell me you're actually out. The single word sliced through the air like a sword. Minji stared at him for a long moment, her expertly applied makeup unable to conceal the shock and mounting rage in her expression. Finally, she gathered her dignity like armor and strode toward the exit. This isn't finished, she said, her voice sharp with promise and menace. Your mother will be informed of this tantrum. The door slammed with enough force to make the windows vibrate. Jae-sung stood alone in the silence, his heart racing. For the first time in years, he had made a choice, taken a stand based on his own feelings rather than family obligation. And it felt like the first genuine breath he'd taken in his entire life. Now, he just needed to find the woman who had made it all possible. Keisha's shift at the hospital cafeteria stretched interminably, each minute feeling like an hour as she robotically served meals and wiped down tables. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving illumination that made her look washed out and exhausted. She couldn't stop thinking about him. The stranger with the haunted eyes. Jae-sung. She'd learned his name from overhearing the nurses, though part of her wished she hadn't. It made everything more tangible, more painful. The doors swished open, and Keisha glanced up from the inventory list she'd been pretending to review. A woman entered, tall, elegant, with the kind of effortless sophistication that belonged in fashion magazines. Her designer purse probably cost more than Keisha earned in 3 months. The woman approached the counter with a smile that looked dangerous. Excuse me, she said, her voice cultured and sharp. I'm searching for someone. A woman named Keisha Williams. I believe she works here. Keisha's blood turned to ice. I'm Keisha. The woman's smile sharpened into something predatory. Perfect. I'm Lee Minji. I believe we need to talk. Minji moved through the cafeteria with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything. She selected several items from the display, expensive specialty items that Keisha knew cost more than her hourly rate, and brought them to the register. You're the one who helped Jae-sung, Minji said, studying Keisha's face carefully. That was very kind of you. Keisha rang up the items with hands that fought not to shake. I just did what anyone would do. Oh, but that's not accurate, is it? Minji leaned against the counter, her proximity making Keisha acutely aware of the expensive fragrance that surrounded her. Most people would have minded their own business, called emergency services perhaps, but you got directly involved. Stayed at the hospital. Even paid his medical expenses, I'm told. The accusation beneath her words was subtle, but unmistakable. Keisha met her gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated despite her hammering heart. He needed help. Minji laughed, the sound like wind chimes before a storm, beautiful but threatening. Of course he did. And I'm sure you're expecting some form of gratitude, some reward for your heroism. Keisha's jaw tightened. I don't want anything from him. Really? Minji's eyebrows arched in mock surprise. How remarkably selfless. Though I have to wonder, a girl in your position working a job like this, living in a neighborhood like the one I drove through to get here. Surely it must have crossed your mind that helping someone like Jae-sung could change your circumstances. Each word was carefully selected, designed to wound. And despite Keisha's best efforts to stay composed, she felt heat rising to her cheeks. I think you need to leave, Keisha said quietly. Minji's smile widened. Oh, but I haven't finished my shopping yet, and we haven't concluded our conversation. She paused, examining Keisha with the intensity of someone appraising livestock. You're quite beautiful in an exotic way. I can see how a man might find that intriguing, especially someone who's lived such a sheltered existence. The words found their mark. Keisha flinched, her hands clenching at her sides. But fascination fades, Minji continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than any shout. And when it does, Jae-sung will remember who he really is, where he truly belongs, who he's meant to be with. The doors swished open again, and both women turned toward the entrance. Keisha's breath caught. Jae-sung stood in the doorway, his dark hair slightly tousled, wearing a simple black turtleneck that somehow made him look more devastatingly handsome than any expensive suit could. His eyes found hers immediately, and the relief in his expression made her knees weak. Keisha, he said, her name falling from his lips like a prayer he'd been waiting to utter. But then his gaze shifted to Minji, and his expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. What are you doing here? He asked, his voice carrying a warning that made the air in the cafeteria feel electrically charged. Minji straightened, her mask of pleasant civility sliding back into place. Just getting acquainted with your little friend. We were having such a fascinating conversation about expectations and proper boundaries. Jae-sung stepped further inside, his presence somehow filling the space until Keisha could barely breathe. When he looked at her again, his eyes were soft with something that might have been apology. Are you okay? He asked her, completely ignoring Minji. Before Keisha could respond, Minji laughed that brittle laugh again. Oh, this is adorable. The heir to Kong Enterprises, slumming in a hospital cafeteria because he's developed an infatuation with the help. The words struck the space between them like a slap. Keisha stepped back instinctively, the reminder of the impossible distance between their worlds making her chest constrict with familiar shame. But Jae-sung's reaction was swift and devastating. He turned to Minji, his face a mask of controlled fury. Leave, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Now, before I call security and have you removed from the premises. Minji's perfect composure fractured, revealing the ugly entitlement beneath. You cannot be serious. Her over me? Over everything our families have built together? I'm completely serious, Jae-sung said, taking another step toward her. Deadly serious. And if you ever speak to Keisha like that again, if you even look at her wrong, you'll discover exactly how serious I can be. For a moment, Minji looked as if she might continue arguing. Then, perhaps recognizing something dangerous in his expression, she gathered her dignity and stalked toward the doors. "This isn't over," she said, echoing her earlier threat. "Your mother will be informed. My father will be informed. You're throwing away everything for a fantasy, Jae-sung, and when you come to your senses, don't expect me to be waiting." The door swished shut behind her with finality. In the silence that followed, Keisha and Jae-sung stared at each other across the small space that suddenly felt vast with unspoken possibilities and impossible obstacles. "I'm sorry," Jae-sung said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm so sorry she spoke to you that way." Keisha shook her head, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. "She's right though, isn't she? About who you are, where you belong." Jae-sung crossed the distance between them in 3 quick strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. "Where I belong," he said, his eyes searching hers with desperate intensity, "is wherever you are. Nothing else matters. Not my family's money, not their expectations, not their plans for my future. The only thing that matters is this moment right here with you." The words hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Keisha wanted to believe them, wanted to fall into the warmth she saw in his eyes, but years of harsh reality had taught her to guard her heart. "Jae-sung," she whispered, her voice breaking on his name. "You don't understand what you're saying. The world you come from, the people in your life, they'll never accept this. Never accept me." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Then maybe it's time I stopped trying to live in their world and started building my own." Before she could protest, before she could list all the reasons why this was impossible, his lips found hers in a kiss that tasted like hope and defiance and the promise of something beautiful enough to fight for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jae-sung rested his forehead against hers. "I know it won't be easy," he said quietly. "I know there will be obstacles, people who try to tear us apart. But Keisha, you saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me a reason to keep fighting when I had given up. Let me fight for this, for us." Looking into his eyes, seeing the fierce determination there, Keisha felt something shift in her chest. Maybe fairy tales didn't exist. Maybe the gulf between their worlds was too wide to bridge. But maybe, just maybe, love was worth the risk of trying. "Okay," she whispered, the word barely audible but carrying the weight of 1,000 promises. "Let's try." And as Jae-sung pulled her into his arms again, as the fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the city pulsed around them, Keisha allowed herself to believe that sometimes, against all odds, the impossible could become possible. But outside in the shadows, unseen eyes watched through the cafeteria windows, and schemes began to form that would test their newfound love in ways neither of them could imagine. The battle for their happiness was just beginning. Thank you so much for joining me on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think will happen next. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible tales of love, sacrifice, and hope. Ring that notification bell so you never miss when the next chapter unfolds. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to continue this amazing story with all of you.